A police officer breaks protocol upon hearing a child crying during a traffic stop. A medical emergency reveals systematic manipulation threatening a family. 3 lives will be transformed by one courageous decision. Before listening to this incredible account, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. Tuesday afternoon was particularly busy on the highway, cutting through the metropolitan area of the capital city. The March sun beat down hard on the asphalt, creating those heat haze waves that distorted vision in the distance. Fiona adjusted her cap and checked the radar for the 5th time that hour. 15 years of career in the highway patrol had molded in her an inflexible routine. She arrived punctually at 7 in the morning, meticulously organized her equipment, and followed every protocol with clockwork precision. Her colleagues respected her, but few approached. There was something in Fiona's upright posture, in the way her blue eyes analyzed every situation with calculated coolness that kept people at a distance. She preferred it that way. Fewer complications, less emotional involvement, fewer chances of making mistakes. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice reporting a minor accident a few miles ahead. Fiona nodded to her patrol partner, Victor, indicating they would head out to provide support. But before they could leave, the radar flashed again. A silver sedan had passed at 75 miles per hour in a 50-mile-per-hour zone. "I'm going after that one," Fiona said, turning on her siren. Victor merely nodded. He knew his partner's temperament well when it came to traffic infractions. For Fiona, every rule had its importance. Every limit existed for a reason. There was no room for exceptions in her orderly world. The sedan slowed down as soon as it saw the flashing lights in the rearview mirror, but did not stop immediately. Fiona frowned, observing how the vehicle swayed slightly between lanes before finally pulling over to the shoulder. Suspicious behavior, she thought, already mentally activating all approach protocols. She parked the patrol car a few yards behind and got out with her characteristic movements, firm, calculated, always with a hand near her equipment. The driver had lowered the window, and she could see it was a young man, appearing to be in his early 30s. There was something in his face, an expression of poorly disguised desperation that Fiona automatically registered. "Good afternoon. Vehicle documents and drivers." "License," she said, maintaining the professional tone she had used for 15 years. The man fumbled nervously in the glove compartment, his hands trembling slightly. "Please, officer, I know I was speeding, but my son—" "Documents first," Fiona cut in, showing no interest in the justification. She had heard thousands of excuses throughout her career. Family emergencies, urgent appointments, important delays. They all sounded the same after a while. It was then that she heard it, a low sound almost imperceptible coming from the back seat, a suppressed, muffled cry that made something strange happen in her chest. Fiona felt a pang of unease she couldn't explain. In 15 years of career, she had developed the ability to emotionally disconnect from every situation, but that sound hit her unexpectedly. She leaned slightly to observe the interior of the vehicle. In the back seat, a boy of approximately 7 years old was huddled, his face flushed and eyes closed. Even from a distance, Fiona could see that something was wrong. The child's breathing was irregular, labored. "My name is Mark," the father said, handing over the documents with visibly trembling hands. "Please, you have to understand. My son, Theo, is feeling unwell. He can't breathe properly and I need to get him to the hospital." Fiona took the documents, but her eyes remained fixed on the child. There were protocols to follow. Infractions had consequences. Rules existed to be followed. But that soft cry kept echoing in her mind, awakening something she had buried long ago. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Since last night. He started with a fever and difficulty breathing. My mother-in-law said it was just a flu, but this morning it got much worse. He can barely speak." Mark looked at his son through the rearview mirror, and Fiona saw genuine anguish in his brown eyes. "I know I broke the speed limit, but he's so unwell. I'm afraid it's something serious." Fiona quickly checked the documents. Everything in order. Mark Allison, 32 years old, valid license, vehicle registered. No outstanding issues in the system. She should apply the fine, advise him to drive more carefully, and release him. It was the protocol. It was what she always did. But when she looked at Theo again, she saw that the boy had opened his eyes. They were large and dark like his father's, but there was something in them that deeply disturbed her, an expression of weariness that shouldn't exist in a child of that age, as if he was fighting against something invisible. "Which hospital are you planning to go to?" Fiona asked, again surprising herself with her own words. "The regional hospital in the North End. It's where his health insurance covers." Fiona knew the route. It was about 20 minutes from there, taking the bypass and crossing through the city centre. During rush hour it could take twice as long. She looked at her watch. 3:30 in the afternoon. Traffic was already starting to get heavy. "Daddy," Theo weakly murmured from the back seat, and the fragile voice made something break inside Fiona's chest. 15 years of career. 15 years strictly following protocols. 15 years maintaining emotional distance from every situation. And now, for a reason she couldn't comprehend, all those rules seemed irrelevant in the face of that boy struggling to breathe. "Follow me," she said, returning the documents to Mark. "I'll clear the way for you." The astonishment on the father's face was immediate. "Seriously? You're going to escort us?" Fiona was already walking back to her patrol car, trying not to question her own decision. "Keep a safe distance and don't exceed the speed I set. Understood?" "Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much," Mark shouted through the window, but Fiona was already turning on her siren. Victor looked at her with curiosity when she got into the patrol car. "Change of plans." "Medical emergency. We're escorting them to the regional hospital." "Since when do we provide medical escorts for traffic infractions?" Victor asked, but his tone was more curious than critical. Fiona didn't answer. She didn't know how to answer herself. She just activated the emergency lights and began to clear a path through traffic, constantly checking her rearview mirror to ensure the silver sedan could keep up. Throughout the journey, a single image remained etched in her mind. Theo's tired eyes, so small and vulnerable, fighting against something she still didn't understand. There was something in that situation that stirred instincts Fiona thought she had lost long ago. Something that made her question, for the first time in years, whether following protocols was always the right choice. What she didn't know was that this impulsive decision would change not only Theo and Mark's fate, but also the course of her own life in ways she could never imagine. The entrance of the regional hospital was as busy as ever on Tuesday afternoons. Fiona parked the patrol car in the emergency area and watched Mark quickly exit the sedan, rushing to open the back door. The way he picked Theo up, with extreme care but evident urgency, revealed a tenderness that contrasted with the desperation in his eyes. Theo seemed even smaller in his father's arms, his fragile little body swaying with each hurried step towards the automatic entrance. Fiona accompanied them, again surprised by her own initiative. In normal situations, she would have merely ensured they arrived at the hospital safely, but something compelled her to remain involved. "Pediatric emergency," Mark shouted to the receptionist, who immediately alerted the on-call medical team. A stout nurse with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun appeared with a small stretcher. "What happened to him?" she asked, as Mark carefully placed Theo on the equipment. "High fever since yesterday, difficulty breathing, he's very sleepy," Mark quickly explained, walking beside the stretcher as they headed for the triage room. Fiona remained in the waiting area, but her attention was entirely focused on the sounds coming from the medical room. She could hear the low voices of the professionals, the beeping of equipment being connected, and occasionally Theo's weak voice answering the team's questions. After a few minutes that felt like hours, a doctor emerged from the room. She was a young-looking woman, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, an immaculate lab coat, and a serious expression that indicated years of experience despite her seemingly young age. "Are you a relative of the child?" the doctor asked, addressing Fiona. "No, I'm the officer who escorted them here." "How is he?" The doctor hesitated for a moment. "Dr. Clara Miller," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "The boy is being evaluated. We'll need some tests to determine what's causing the symptoms. Mark emerged from the room at that moment, his shoulders slumped and a look of deep exhaustion on his face. Fiona noticed how he seemed to carry a weight much greater than the current situation would justify, as if this emergency was just another layer of worry in an already burdened life. "They're going to do blood tests and a chest X-ray," Mark explained to Fiona, although she hadn't asked. There was something about her presence that reassured him, a feeling that he wasn't completely alone in that difficult moment. "And the child's mother?" Dr. Clara asked, consulting her clipboard. Mark's expression immediately hardened. "She is no longer with us. It's been 2 years." The doctor nodded with understanding. "And who else has legal responsibility for Theo? Grandparents? Other relatives?" "My mother-in-law, Agnes, has primary custody. I only have visitation rights on weekends." Mark's voice carried poorly disguised bitterness. "But she's traveling, and I had to pick Theo up from school because he was feeling unwell." Fiona observed the exchange of information with growing interest. There were subtleties in the conversation that piqued her professional curiosity, developed over years of investigating accidents and complex situations on the road. "We'll need to get in touch with her," Dr. Clara said. "I've tried calling several times. She's not answering. I left messages explaining the situation." The doctor made some notes and returned to the room where Theo was being examined. Mark sat heavily in one of the plastic chairs in the waiting room, running his hands over his face with weariness. Fiona sat next to him, breaking yet another personal protocol. She always avoided emotional involvement, but something about that situation kept her there. "How long have you not had custody of your son?" she asked, surprised by her own curiosity. Mark looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and sadness. 2 years. Since we lost Anna. Agnes managed to convince the court that I wasn't in a condition to care for him alone." "And were you?" The question came out more direct than Fiona intended, but Mark didn't seem offended. On the contrary, it was as if he had been waiting for someone to ask exactly that question. "I was broken," he admitted. "Anna was everything to me, to us. When she was gone, I sort of disconnected from everything. Theo needed stability, and Agnes offered that. She had a big house, structure, available time. I could barely take care of myself." Fiona nodded, acknowledging the brutal honesty in his answer. "And now?" "Now I've rebuilt myself. I have a stable job, a suitable home, I've had therapy. But Agnes, she seems to believe I'll never be able to take good care of Theo. And the judicial system has already decided in her favor once." Before Fiona could respond, Dr. Clara returned with a worried expression. "We need to discuss the preliminary results," she said, looking specifically at Mark. "Could you come with me?" Mark stood up quickly. "Of course. Is he okay?" "Let's talk in the private room," the doctor replied, indicating a small adjacent consulting room. Fiona was left alone in the waiting room for almost 40 minutes. During that time, she observed the hospital's activity. Worried families, crying children, professionals rushing by. It was a microcosm of human dramas that she would normally observe with professional detachment, but today, for some reason, every scene seemed more intense, more real. When Mark finally emerged from the room, his face was pale and his hands trembled slightly. "What happened?" Fiona stood up immediately. "They found something strange in his blood. High levels of substances a child shouldn't have in their system." Mark sat down again, this time looking completely lost. "The doctor said they'll need to do more tests, but she suspects someone might be giving Theo inappropriate medication." The information hit Fiona like a punch. Years of police experience had developed in her a keen instinct for situations that weren't what they seemed at first glance. What kind of substances? Sedatives, anxiolytics, adult medications in doses that could be dangerous for a child. Mark looked at her with an expression of complete confusion. "I don't understand. Who would do that? And why?" Fiona felt a wave of anger rising in her chest, a feeling she had kept under strict control for years. The image of Theo's tired eyes took on a new, much more sinister meaning. Did Dr. Clara mention anything about previous episodes? Mark nodded slowly. She said Theo has been hospitalized 3 times in the last 6 months, always with similar symptoms: excessive drowsiness, mild respiratory problems, low fever, and always when he was under Agnes's care. The pieces began to fall into place in Fiona's analytical mind, forming a disturbing pattern she would rather not acknowledge. "Mark, I need to ask you a very important question," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "How does Theo behave when he's with you on weekends?" "Completely different. He's full of energy, playful, curious. Sometimes I even think he gets better because he's happy to be with me, you know." Mark paused, as if a terrible realization was forming in his mind. "Why are you asking that?" Fiona didn't answer immediately. She was processing information, connecting dots, following an instinct that rarely misled her. But the implications of what she was beginning to suspect were so serious that she needed to be sure before verbalizing her thoughts. "I think you need to fight for custody of your son again," she finally said, "and I think this time you have very strong grounds for it." The pediatric ward had a characteristic scent of disinfectant mixed with the soft perfume of children's products. Theo was connected to monitors that recorded his vital signs with soft, constant beeps. Even asleep, there was a peace on his face that hadn't existed when Fiona first saw him in the car, just a few hours earlier. Mark hadn't left the bedside since they arrived. His hands rested on the side rail, observing every breath of his son with an attention that bordered on obsession. Fiona remained near the window, technically off duty for over 2 hours, but unable to detach herself from the situation. "He's calmer," Mark observed, turning to her. "It's strange to say that about a sick child, but he seems more present, you know, even asleep." Fiona nodded. She had also noticed the difference. Theo's sleep now seemed natural, restorative, not the worrying lethargy she had observed in the car. Dr. Clara entered the room, carrying a tablet and a folder with test results. Her serious expression indicated that the news was not simple. "How is he?" Mark asked, standing up immediately. "Physically, he's recovering well. His fever has gone down, breathing is normal, and vital signs are stable." The doctor paused, looking at the 2 adults. "But I need to share some information that I consider concerning." Mark sat down slowly, bracing himself for what was to come. The toxicology tests confirmed the presence of multiple sedatives in Theo's blood. These are not medications a child should be taking, and certainly not in the doses we found. Furthermore, I've reviewed his complete medical history. Dr. Clara opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. Over the past 8 months, Theo has been seen in emergencies 6 times, always with similar symptoms: excessive drowsiness, episodes of mental confusion, mild respiratory problems. On all occasions, he was under the care of his grandmother, who reported anxiety attacks and panic attacks as justification for the symptoms. Mark ran a hand through his hair, an expression of disbelief growing on his face. 6 times? But Agnes always told me they were just common colds or viruses. "There's more," the doctor continued. "I found medical prescriptions in Theo's name for anxiolytic medications, all signed by the same doctor and all requested by his grandmother, theoretically to treat severe childhood anxiety." Fiona approached, her police instincts fully activated. "Doctor, is it common for 7-year-olds to receive this type of medication?" "Extremely rare. And when prescribed, it is always accompanied by intensive psychological therapy and constant medical monitoring. There are no records of psychological follow-up in Theo's medical file." The silence in the room was broken only by the soft beeps of the monitors. Mark was looking at his sleeping son, and Fiona could see the exact moment when the full realization hit his face. "She was medicating my son," he said, his voice low but laden with growing anger. "Agnes was giving him drugs to keep him quiet, under control." "I cannot make that diagnosis," Dr. Clara replied carefully, "but I can confirm that the substances found in his blood are inconsistent with any legitimate medical treatment for a healthy child." Fiona felt a wave of indignation that surprised her with its intensity. In 15 years of career, she had seen many difficult situations, but something about Theo's vulnerability, about the systematic manipulation he was suffering, activated a protective instinct in her that she thought she had lost. "What happens now?" Mark asked. "Legally, I need to report these findings to the competent authorities. Child Protective Services will be notified, and there will likely be a social investigation." Mark stood up abruptly, beginning to pace back and forth in the small space of the room. "Agnes has influence in the city. She knows important people, has friends in various sectors, and He paused, looking at Fiona as if seeking support. "I'm just a man who lost his wife and has supervised visits with his own son." "That doesn't mean you don't have rights," Fiona said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It does mean that," Mark retorted bitterly. "The system already decided once that Agnes was the best option for Theo. She has a big house, financial stability, support networks. I have a small apartment and a history of depression after losing my wife," Dr. Clara intervened. "Mark, the medical evidence we have is very serious. Any investigation will have to take that into consideration. What if she can explain it? What if she says she was just following medical advice? What if she brings the doctor who prescribed the medications to defend her?" The question hung in the air, and Fiona realized Mark had reason to be concerned. Agnes had built a seemingly legitimate medical narrative over months. It would be his word against hers, and she had all the formal documentation. At that moment, Theo stirred in bed, slowly, opening his eyes. For the first time since Fiona had met him, he seemed truly awake, present. "Daddy?" he murmured, looking for Mark. Mark immediately approached, taking his son's small hand. "I'm here, champ. How are you feeling?" "Better. Can I have some water?" Theo's voice was clear, without the lethargy that had characterized his few words in the car. Dr. Clara picked up a cup with a straw and offered it to him. "Do you know where you are, Theo?" she asked gently. "In the hospital. I was feeling bad, but now I'm better." He looked around the room, and his eyes landed on Fiona. "Are you the police officer who helped us?" Fiona approached the bed, feeling something warm in her chest. "I am. My name is Fiona. How are you?" "Good. My head doesn't feel heavy anymore." Theo smiled, a genuine child's expression that contrasted drastically with the lethargic state in which she had found him. Mark looked at Dr. Clara with an expression of hope. "He's normal. More alert than I've seen him in months." "It's exactly what I expected," the doctor confirmed. "As the substances leave his system, his natural personality is returning." Fiona observed the interaction between father and son, noticing how Theo became more animated with each passing minute. There was a light in his eyes that had probably been absent for a long time. "Mark," she said, making a decision that would go against all the advice she would surely receive, "do you have a lawyer?" "No, I mean I had one during the custody process, but you're going to need one, and you're going to need someone who understands both family law and cases involving child abuse. Do you think it's worth trying?" Fiona looked at Theo, who was quietly talking to the doctor about the cartoons playing on the room's television. The difference in the child was extraordinary. She was seeing for the first time who Theo truly was when he wasn't under the influence of inappropriate medications. "I think you don't have a choice," she replied. "Your son has been systematically medicated to be more convenient to care for. That's not just wrong. It's a form of abuse that can have lasting consequences for his development." Mark nodded slowly, and Fiona saw a determination growing in his eyes that hadn't been there a few hours earlier. "I'm going to call Agnes again," he said. "She needs to know what we've discovered." "Mark, wait," Dr. Clara intervened. "Perhaps it's better to wait until the competent authorities are notified. If there's a suspicion of inappropriate medication, the situation needs to be handled officially." Fiona agreed. Her years of police experience had taught her that confronting suspects before having all the evidence organized rarely led to good results. She's right. Agnes might try to discard medications, alter medical records, or create a version of events that will be difficult to dispute later. Mark looked at his son, who was now quietly humming a song he had heard on television. It was a scene that should be common, a child being a child, but which gained profound meaning given the context they had discovered. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "Now," Fiona said, "we ensure Theo remains safe and we start building a solid case so this never happens again." What none of them knew was that Agnes had already been informed of the hospitalization by someone at the hospital, and that at that very moment she was at the nearest airport, cancelling her trip and reorganizing her strategies to face the situation that threatened her control over Theo's life. Fiona's phone rang at 6 in the morning on Wednesday, just 12 hours after leaving the hospital. It was her direct supervisor, Sergeant Allen, summoning her to an urgent and confidential meeting before her shift began. The formal tone and unusual time of the call set off an alarm in her mind. Fiona arrived at the highway patrol station 40 minutes earlier than her usual time. The building was almost empty, with only a few administrative staff organizing the day's activities. She found Sergeant Allen in his office, accompanied by a man she didn't recognize, a 50-something in a dark suit with a rigid posture that screamed senior bureaucracy. "Fiona, this is Chief Inspector Peter Carmine from Internal Affairs," Allen said, indicating a chair in front of his desk. Fiona's stomach tightened. Internal Affairs meant internal investigation, disciplinary problems, questions about professional conduct. She sat maintaining the upright posture that characterized her 15 years of impeccable career. "Sergeant Fiona," Peter began, consulting a folder, "we have become aware of some irregularities in your conduct during yesterday's shift, specifically related to inappropriate involvement with civilians during a traffic stop. With all due respect, sir, may I know what irregularities you are referring to?" Peter exchanged a significant look with Allen before responding. "You escorted a vehicle to a hospital, remained on medical premises for hours when you should have been on patrol, and apparently became personally involved in family matters that exceed your responsibilities as a highway patrol officer." Fiona felt a wave of indignation rise in her chest, but kept her voice controlled. "It was a medical emergency involving a child. I assessed that the escort was necessary to ensure traffic safety." "And the subsequent 3 hours you spent at the hospital? Was that also part of traffic safety?" The irony in Peter's voice was evident. "I wanted to make sure the child was okay." "Sergeant Fiona," Allen intervened, with an expression of genuine discomfort. "You have 15 years of exemplary service. No one is questioning your intentions. But there is a protocol for medical situations. You should have called emergency medical services and returned to patrol." "The child was in critical condition. The child had a flu," Peter cut in. "At least that's what the medical report we received from the grandmother states, who also filed a formal complaint about undue police interference in family matters." Fiona felt as if she had been punched. "What medical report?" Peter opened another folder. "Agnes Sterling was at Internal Affairs last night. She is a very respected woman in the community, has worked for 20 years in the city's social services department. According to her, her grandson had a simple flu, was treated appropriately, and your interference created unnecessary embarrassment for the family." "That's not true. The toxicology tests showed—" "What toxicology tests?" Peter interrupted her again. "There's no mention of that in the medical file we received, just treatment for flu-like symptoms and a normal medical discharge." Fiona looked at Allen, seeking some sign of support, but saw only embarrassment in his eyes. It was clear he had been pressured to conduct this meeting. "Sergeant, I'll be direct," Peter said, closing the folders. "Ms. Agnes is a respected figure in the city. She has friends in various spheres of public power. She doesn't want to create problems for you, but she made it clear that any additional interference in her family will be seen as harassment." "Harassment?" Fiona couldn't contain the incredulity in her voice. She mentioned that you asked inappropriate questions about the family situation, questioned her medical decisions, and created an atmosphere of suspicion without any legal justification. Allen shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Fiona, what Chief Inspector Peter is saying is that you need to step away from this situation. Completely. Any further contact with this family could be interpreted as abuse of authority. And if I refuse?" The silence in the room was eloquent. Peter closed his folders with a calculated movement. "Sergeant, you have a brilliant career. It wouldn't be wise to throw it away over a misunderstanding involving a family you barely... No. Fiona stood up slowly. 15 years of career had taught her to choose her battles, but also developed in her a keen instinct for situations where something was fundamentally wrong. "May I see the medical report she presented?" Peter hesitated only a moment before handing over a copy. Fiona quickly examined the document. It was from the same hospital where she had been the previous day, but it seemed to have been written by a different doctor. There was no mention of sedatives, toxicology tests, or the suspicions raised by Dr. Clara. "This report doesn't match what I witnessed yesterday," she said calmly. "Are you questioning the veracity of an official medical document?" Peter asked, his tone laden with warning. Fiona understood the message perfectly. Agnes had used her influence to obtain a second report, probably from a doctor friend, that completely contradicted Dr. Clara's findings. It was a calculated and efficient move. "I understand," she finally said. "Anything else?" "Only that we expect you to return to your normal duties and avoid any involvement with this family," Peter concluded. Fiona left the room with her mind racing. 20 minutes later, she was in her private car, driving to the hospital. If she couldn't act as a police officer, she would act as a citizen. She found Mark in the hospital parking lot, carrying a small backpack. Theo was beside him, visibly more animated than the day before, swinging his legs as he waited. "Fiona, good to see you," Mark said, genuinely relieved. "They discharged Theo this morning. The tests are normal now." "How is he?" she asked, crouching down to the boy's height. "Much better. Look, Aunt Fiona, I managed to tie my shoes all by myself today." Theo proudly showed his feet, and she realized it was the first time he had called her aunt. There was a spontaneity in his movements, a vivacity that hadn't existed 2 days earlier. "Congratulations, Theo. You're much sharper today. Daddy said you helped us a lot. Thank you for being our friend." Fiona felt something tighten in her chest. The child's simplicity and sincerity contrasted drastically with the bureaucratic manipulation she had faced an hour earlier. "Mark, I need to tell you something," she said, standing up. "Agnes was at Internal Affairs last night. She's trying to discredit everything we discovered." Mark's face immediately hardened. "Of course she is. I should have expected it. She managed to get a second medical report that completely contradicts Dr. Clara's findings. According to this document, Theo just had a common flu. How is that possible? Influence, contacts, people owing favors." Fiona looked around, ensuring they weren't being observed. "Mark, I've been told to stay away from the case. Officially, I can no longer help you." The hope that had shone in Mark's eyes the day before began to fade. "So that's it? Agnes wins again?" "I didn't say I can't help you," Fiona corrected. "I said I can't officially. There's a difference." At that moment, a Child Protective Services van pulled into the hospital parking lot. A sturdy woman with short hair and formal clothes stepped out of the vehicle, accompanied by a younger man carrying a folder. "Mark Allison?" the woman called, approaching the group. "That's me. I'm Rose, a social worker from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Luke. We need to talk to you about Theo's situation." Mark looked at Fiona, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Theo, can you go play over there in the playground where we can see you?" The boy happily ran to the small playground near the hospital entrance, displaying an energy Fiona had never seen him have before. "We received a report about suspected inappropriate medication," Rose began, consulting her folder. "But we also received contradictory information from other sources. We will need to conduct a full assessment of the situation." "What kind of assessment?" Mark asked. "We'll need to visit your residence, talk to Theo in a controlled environment, and speak with everyone involved in the situation, including his grandmother." Luke intervened. "Mr. Allison, I need to inform you that any change in current custody will depend on a formal judicial process. Until then, the child must return to the care of the legal guardian." "But considering the medical suspicions," Mark began. "The suspicions are still being investigated," Rose replied, "and we have conflicting information from different medical sources. Until we have full clarity, we need to maintain stability for the child. Fiona saw frustration growing on Mark's face. It was exactly what Agnes had calculated. Create enough confusion to maintain the status quo until she could consolidate her version of events. "When does Agnes return from her trip?" Rose asked. "She's already returned," a voice said from behind them. Everyone turned. Agnes Sterling was walking towards the group, accompanied by a man in a dark suit whom Fiona immediately recognized as a lawyer. Agnes was a woman of approximately 60, with perfectly styled grey hair, elegant clothes, and a posture that radiated authority and respectability. "Theo, my love, come with Grandma," she called, completely ignoring Mark and Fiona. Theo stopped playing and looked towards the adult voices. Fiona carefully observed his reaction. There was something in the child's face, a subtle change in his expression as if a light had dimmed slightly. "Grandma," he said, running towards the group, but stopping, next to Mark instead of going directly to Agnes. "Come, dear, let's go home. You were sick and scared everyone," Agnes said, extending her arms. Theo looked at his father, an expression of confusion in his eyes. "Daddy, can I stay with you a little longer? I feel good when I'm here." The child's spontaneous declaration resonated in the air like an involuntary confession. Agnes quickly intervened. "Of course you feel good, love. It's because the doctor gave you medicine to make you better. Now we need to continue your treatment at home." Fiona observed the interaction with professional attention, noting how Agnes quickly redirected the situation to focus on treatment instead of addressing the child's expressed desire to stay with his father. "Miss Sterling," Rose said, "we'll need to discuss the medications Theo was taking." "Of course, dear. I have all the medical documentation at home. Dr. Philip has been monitoring Theo for months to treat his severe anxiety. It's a delicate condition that requires constant care." The lawyer, accompanying Agnes, stepped forward. "I am Dr. Aaron Collins. I represent the Sterling family in legal matters. I would like to clarify that any questioning about appropriate medical care should be directed through the proper channels, with all necessary legal documentation." The message was clear. Agnes was prepared for a full legal battle, with all the bureaucratic ammunition and influence needed. Mark looked at Theo, who was now visibly less animated, as if Agnes's very presence brought back an apathy that had disappeared during his stay at the hospital. "When can I see Theo again?" Mark asked. "As judicially established, alternate weekends," Dr. Aaron replied dryly. "But considering the ongoing investigation," Rose tried. "There is no formal investigation," the lawyer cut in. "There is a medical misunderstanding that has already been clarified by competent professionals. The child is healthy and should return to his stable, familiar environment." Fiona watched Theo being led away by Agnes, noting how the child's small shoulders seemed to slump slightly, as if he were bracing himself for something unpleasant. It was an image that would be etched in her memory for the difficult days to come. 2 weeks had passed since Theo returned to Agnes's care, and Mark felt as if he were living in a slow-motion nightmare. Each day that went by without seeing his son felt like an eternity, especially knowing what he now suspected was happening in that house. Fiona met Mark at the small cafe near the city courthouse, where he was awaiting his parental capacity assessment hearing. She had taken medical leave, something she had never done in 15 years of her career, citing occupational stress. Technically, it was true. The pressure to abandon Theo and Mark had created a tension in her that she couldn't ignore. "How are you?" she asked, sitting at a discreet table in the back of the establishment. Mark seemed to have aged years in 2 weeks. There were deep circles under his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he brought his coffee cup to his lips. "I got a lawyer," he said, trying to sound hopeful. "Dr. Victor Lyman. He specializes in family law and said we have a real chance." "That's great. And how are you preparing for the assessment?" "I've done intensive therapy, organized all the documentation of my life over the past 2 years, got letters of recommendation from work, from neighbors, even from Theo's teacher." Mark paused, stirring sugar into his already sweet coffee. "But I'm scared, Fiona. What if it's not enough?" Fiona had her own concerns. In recent days, she had conducted her own informal investigations, and what she had discovered was disturbing. "Mark, I need to tell you some things I found out about Agnes." He looked up, a mixture of hope and apprehension in his expression. I spoke unofficially with some colleagues who work in different sectors. Agnes really does have considerable influence in the city. She's worked in social services for 20 years, knows judges, prosecutors, has connections everywhere that matters. I figured as much, but did you find out anything specific? I found out she's been through a similar situation before. Mark straightened in his chair. What do you mean? 10 years ago, Agnes had temporary custody of another grandchild, the child of a sister of her late daughter, Anna. The child exhibited symptoms similar to Theo's: excessive drowsiness, behavioral problems, frequent hospitalizations. What happened? The child's mother fought for custody back and got it. After the child left Agnes's house, the medical problems simply disappeared. Mark clenched his fists on the table. Why didn't this information come up before? Because it was hushed up. The mother didn't want to create a public scandal. Agnes has powerful friends, and the family preferred to resolve everything discreetly without criminal proceedings. Were you able to talk to that mother? Fiona hesitated. I tried. She moved to another city soon after, but I managed to speak with a nurse who worked on the case at the time. She remembers the medical suspicions but said they never managed to prove anything conclusively. Mark's phone rang. It was Dr. Victor Lyman, his lawyer. Mark, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we managed to schedule a home visit for tomorrow, where you can demonstrate your living conditions and readiness to care for Theo. The bad news is that Agnes requested a psychological evaluation of you, citing concerns about your emotional stability. Mark put the phone on speaker so Fiona could hear. What kind of evaluation? Mark asked. Comprehensive. Interviews, psychological tests, history analysis. It will take a few weeks. And Mark, she's brought in a psychologist who will testify about the risks of you having custody of Theo. Mark hung up the phone and buried his head in his hands. She's always one step ahead, he murmured. Fiona felt a wave of determination surge in her chest. Years of police work had developed in her a profound aversion to injustice, especially when it involved vulnerable people being manipulated by those in positions of power. Mark, have you seen Theo since he went back to her house? Only once, last weekend. And he was strange, apathetic again, as if all the progress we saw at the hospital had disappeared. Did he say anything? He asked why he couldn't stay with me during the week, said he felt more awake when he was with me. Mark looked at Fiona with teary eyes. How do I explain to a 7-year-old boy that the court believes his manipulative grandmother more than the father who loves him? Fiona had no answer to that question, but she knew there were ways to gather evidence that could make a difference. Mark, would you trust me to do something that might be risky? He looked her directly in the eyes. Fiona, you're the only person who's believed me from the start. Of course I trust you. I need access to Agnes's house when she's not there. I need to see how she's keeping the medications, look for evidence that she's fabricating medical symptoms. Isn't that trespassing? Technically, yes, but if we find evidence that a child is being systematically drugged, any judge would consider the mitigating circumstances. Mark was silent for a long moment. Agnes goes shopping every Thursday morning. She's out for 2 or 3 hours. Do you have the keys? Anna gave me a copy years ago for emergencies. I never used it after we lost custody. Thursday is tomorrow. Before Mark could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Allison, this is Dr. Clara Miller from the regional hospital. Sorry to call directly, but I need to speak with you urgently. Fiona gestured for him to put it on speaker again. You can speak, Doctor. Theo was brought to the hospital this morning. Agnes said he had an anxiety attack overnight, but when I examined him, I found symptoms consistent with excessive sedation again. Mark went pale. How is he? Stabilized but drowsy. Mark, I need to tell you something confidentially. I managed to collect blood samples before Agnes arrived with her family doctor. If my suspicion is correct, we'll have irrefutable laboratory evidence this time. Can I see him? Agnes prohibited visits that are not on the days. They're established by the court. But Mark, a nurse who knew your wife, Anna, told me some things about the family history that I think you need to know. What things? Agnes always had an excessive need for control. Even when Anna was alive, she constantly tried to interfere in Theo's upbringing. Anna even talked to me about the pressures she faced from her mother-in-law. Mark swallowed hard. Anna never told me that. She didn't want to create family problems, but according to this nurse, Agnes always believed she knew better than anyone how to care for children, and she always had easy access to medications through her contacts in social services. The silence on the line was broken by background noise at the hospital. I need to hang up. Agnes is coming back. But Mark, the test results will be ready in 48 hours. If they confirm what I suspect, you'll have irrefutable evidence. After hanging up, Mark looked at Fiona with a determined expression she hadn't seen before. Let's do this, Thursday morning. We need to find the evidence before she can hide or destroy it. Fiona nodded. We'll only have one chance. If we get caught, your legal situation will get even worse. And if we do nothing, my son will continue to be systematically drugged by a woman who prefers a lethargic child to a healthy, normal one. That night, Fiona couldn't sleep. 15 years of police career respecting the law to the letter, and now she was planning to trespass on a respectable citizen's property to look for evidence of child abuse. It was a line she never imagined crossing, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Theo's face in the hospital, awake and full of life, contrasting with the apathy he showed after spending a few days with Agnes. There were children who depended on adults brave enough to do the right thing, even when that right thing wasn't exactly within the law. The next morning, at 9:15 on Thursday, Mark and Fiona were parked in front of Agnes's house. She had left 15 minutes earlier, following her weekly routine with the punctuality Agnes demonstrated in all aspects of her controlled life. The house was imposing. 2 stories, a perfectly manicured garden, an architectural expression of respectability and stability. It was exactly the kind of place any judicial system would consider ideal for raising a child. Last chance to change your mind, Fiona said. Mark looked at the house where his son was being systematically harmed under the guise of loving care. Let's go in, he said, opening the car door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Mark felt a shiver run down his spine as he stepped back into the house where Anna had grown up. The familiar scent of lavender and cleaning products brought painful memories of happier times, when they visited Agnes as a united family before everything fell apart. Fiona entered behind him, quietly closing the door. The house was impeccably organized, every object in its designated place, a visual demonstration of the meticulous control Agnes exerted over all aspects of her life. Where do we start? Mark whispered. Medications first. They're usually in the main bathroom or kitchen, Fiona responded, her police experience guiding the search. They headed upstairs. Theo's room was at the end of the hall, the door decorated with children's drawings Agnes had allowed him to stick up. A calculated concession to the appearance of a loving grandmother. Mark stopped in front of the room, his hand on the doorknob. I want to see how he's being kept here. Fiona nodded, and they entered the child's room. At first glance, it seemed the perfect environment for a 7-year-old boy. A tidy bed with superhero duvet, a bookshelf full of books, toys neatly arranged. But Fiona, trained to observe details, noticed disturbing aspects. Mark, look at this. She pointed to the bedside table. There was a small plastic cup and a bottle of cough syrup. Why would a healthy child have medication next to his bed? Mark picked up the bottle. Cough syrup, but Theo wasn't coughing when I saw him. Last weekend. Fiona examined the label. This is a codeine cough syrup. It causes intense drowsiness in children. And look at the expiration date. It was bought just 3 days ago. They continued their investigation, finding more bottles of medication in Agnes's master bathroom. The quantity was alarming. Anxiolytics, mild sedatives, syrups with components that caused lethargy, all with prescriptions from different doctors. Fiona, look at this. Mark was leafing through a diary he found on Agnes's study desk. She notes everything here. Medication times, anxiety episodes, doctor's appointments. Fiona leaned closer and read over Mark's shoulder. The notes were meticulous and revealing. Theo, very agitated today. Increase nighttime dose. Crying episode. Administer extra calming medicine. Father's visit tomorrow. Prepare for symptoms. My God, Fiona murmured. She's documenting how she's manipulating his mental state. Mark turned the pages, finding records going back months. Agnes had created a complex system of medication, varying doses according to her convenience, always with seemingly legitimate medical justifications. Here, Mark said, pointing to a specific note. The day we met on the highway, Theo had episode before paternal visit. Apply emergency protocol. She planned that, Fiona. She purposely medicated him to create a medical emergency during my visit. Fiona discreetly photographed the pages with her cell phone. It was circumstantial evidence, but powerful enough to support their suspicions. It was then that they heard the sound of a car in the driveway. She's back early, Mark whispered, panic evident in his voice. Fiona rushed to the window. It was Agnes, getting out of her sedan with several shopping bags, but there was something different in her posture, an urgency that suggested she suspected something. We have 2 minutes before she gets into the house, Fiona said. I need more physical evidence. They rushed back to the bathroom, where Fiona quickly photographed all the medication bottles, focusing on the labels with dates and prescriptions. Mark took a few pills from each bottle, placing them in small paper envelopes Fiona had brought. The sound of the key in the front door echoed through the house. Theo? Agnes is home, dear. Agnes's voice resonated from downstairs. Mark froze on the stairs. Theo isn't here. He should be at school. Then why is Agnes talking as if he's home? Fiona felt a chill run down her spine. The answer came in the form of a weak voice from what seemed to be the basement. Grandma, I'm down here. Theo's voice sounded lethargic, distant, completely different from the animated child Fiona had seen at the hospital. Agnes went down the stairs leading to the basement, and Fiona took the opportunity to move silently towards the basement stairs. What she saw made her feel nauseous. Theo was lying on a sofa in the basement, a television playing some children's show, but his eyes were glazed over, only half closed. There was a half-empty juice glass beside him, and Agnes was holding another bottle of medication. Time for your medicine, dear. This will make you feel better. I don't want to, Grandma. I don't feel bad. I want to go to school. You're sick, Theo, remember? That's why you need to stay home and take your medicine. Fiona saw Agnes pour a generous amount of syrup onto the spoon, a dose that seemed excessive even for an adult. But I feel good when I don't take the medicine, Theo weakly protested. Don't be silly. You have a serious condition that requires treatment. Now, open your mouth. It was at that moment that Fiona made a decision that would change everything. She descended the stairs, revealing her presence. Agnes, stop immediately. Agnes turned quickly, the spoonful of medicine still in her hand. Her expression rapidly shifted from shock to calculated indignation. What are you doing in my house? This is trespassing. Fiona? Theo sat up on the sofa, his eyes gaining a little more focus. Aunt Fiona, did you come to see me? Hi, Theo. Yes, I came to see you. Fiona kept her voice calm, but her eyes were fixed on the medicine bottle in Agnes's hands. Mark appeared on the stairs behind her. Daddy. Theo tried to stand up, but swayed slightly. Daddy, I'm fine, but Grandma says I need to take medicine. Agnes's expression hardened when she saw Mark. You brought this man into my house? After everything we discussed about boundaries and protocols? Agnes, Mark said, descending the stairs, we need to talk about what's happening with Theo. What's happening is that your son has serious anxiety problems that require constant medical treatment, something you, evidently, are incapable of understanding or managing. Fiona approached Theo, observing his symptoms closely. The child was clearly under the influence of sedatives, but still conscious enough to recognize them and try to interact. Agnes, what medication is that? Fiona asked, pointing to the bottle. None of your business. You have no legal authority here. I have moral authority, and I have evidence of what you're doing to this child. The silence in the basement was broken only by the sound of the television. Agnes looked from Fiona to Mark, calculating her options. Evidence of what? Of adequately caring for a child with special medical needs? Of following legitimate medical prescriptions? Mark stepped forward. Agnes, we found your diary. We know you're documenting how you manipulate his medication for your convenience. The mask of the devoted grandmother began to slip from Agnes's face. You ransacked my house? You violated my privacy? You are systematically drugging my son. Mark's voice rose for the first time, years of frustration and suppressed anger finally exploding. Theo cringed on the sofa, startled by the conflict. Fiona immediately addressed him. Theo, everything's going to be okay. No one is angry with you. I just want the fighting to stop, he murmured. I want to stay with my daddy and not take any more medicine that makes me sleep. The child's innocent declaration resonated in the space like a confession. Agnes realized she had lost control of the situation. You don't understand anything. Theo is a difficult, hyperactive, anxious child. Without proper medication, he becomes uncontrollable. I am protecting him from himself. You are protecting yourself, Fiona retorted. It's easier to care for a sedated child than a normal, energetic one. How dare you judge me? I took care of this child when Mark was an emotional wreck, incapable of taking care of himself. And you took advantage of that situation to assume total control over Theo, using medication as a tool of control. Agnes clutched, the medicine bottle in her hands, her composure finally disintegrating completely. Theo needs structure, discipline. He needs to learn that he can't just do what he wants when he wants. He's 7 years old, Agnes, Mark said, picking his son up in his arms. He should be playing, learning, growing, not being kept in a state of lethargy for your convenience. At that moment, sirens sounded outside. Fiona had discreetly called emergency services during the confrontation. You called the police? Agnes looked at her with disbelief. I called Child Protective Services and an ambulance to ensure Theo receives proper medical evaluation. Agnes quickly moved towards the stairs, but Fiona blocked her path. Agnes, it's over. We have physical evidence, written documentation, and now direct testimony of what you were doing. The woman who for months had manipulated legal and medical systems through influence and connections was finally cornered by concrete and irrefutable evidence. Mark held Theo tightly, whispering words of comfort as the child gradually began to understand that his life was about to fundamentally change. The year that followed was an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved, but especially for Theo, who had to go through a careful detoxification process from the medications he had been forced to take for so long. Dr. Clara personally supervised his recovery, and the results were extraordinary. Mark gained emergency custody of Theo on the same day as the confrontation with Agnes. Toxicology tests performed immediately after the rescue confirmed the presence of multiple sedatives at dangerous levels for a child. The diary found in Agnes's house, combined with the medication bottles and the photographs Fiona had collected, constituted irrefutable evidence of systematic manipulation. Agnes was legally barred from any contact with Theo, except for monthly supervised visits, which she never chose to make. The judicial process revealed that she had developed an obsessive need for control after losing her daughter Anna, channeling her grief into an attempt to keep Theo permanently dependent and submissive. She was ordered to undergo psychological counseling and had her license to work in social services suspended. Dr. Philip, the doctor who had prescribed the inappropriate medications, was investigated by the medical board and had his license reviewed. It was discovered that he had been manipulated by Agnes, who used her position in social services to influence health professionals through personal relationships and bureaucratic favors. Fiona made the most important decision of her career. She requested a transfer from the Highway Patrol to specialize in child and adolescent protection. She used her experience with Theo as motivation to dedicate herself fully to cases involving child vulnerability. Her initial supervisors were uncomfortable with the change, but the results obtained in Theo's case proved that she had found her true calling. Mark flourished as a single father in a way that surprised even himself. With Theo finally free from the medications, he rediscovered the brilliant and energetic personality of his son that had been suppressed for so long. the boy, became curious, playful, inquisitive again, exactly as a child his age should be. The healing process was not simple. Theo spent months in therapy to understand why he had felt asleep while awake for so long. Gradually, he began to understand that there was nothing wrong with him, that his natural energy and curiosity were positive characteristics that should be celebrated, not suppressed. Mark returned to work with renewed motivation, moved to a larger apartment, decorated Theo's room with the colors the boy chose, and established routines that allowed both of them to grow together. He learned to navigate the challenges of single parenthood without trying to control every aspect of his son's lively personality. The bond between Mark and Fiona grew naturally throughout the legal process and Theo's recovery. It wasn't a movie romance, but rather a deep connection based on mutual respect, shared goals, and an understanding that both had been fundamentally transformed by that experience. 3 years later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Fiona was leaving a diner in the city centre when she heard a familiar voice shouting her name. "Aunt Fiona! Aunt Fiona!" She turned and saw Theo running towards her, now a 10-year-old boy, tall for his age, hair dishevelled by the wind, a huge smile and eyes shining with the intelligence and vivacity she remembered from the hospital, but amplified by health and happiness. "Theo, how you've grown." Fiona hugged him, feeling a wave of emotion seeing how radiant with health he was. Mark approached, also visibly transformed. There was a lightness in his eyes, a confidence in his posture that hadn't existed when she met him on that highway afternoon 3 years earlier. "Fiona, what an incredible coincidence to find you here. How are you both? Theo, tell me everything." "I'm great. I'm in 4th grade, I play soccer. I learned to ride my bike without training wheels, and Daddy taught me how to make pancakes." The words spilled out in a torrent, demonstrating the natural energy that had been suppressed for so long. "And you, Mark, how are you?" "Better than I ever imagined possible. Theo and we found our rhythm, you know. We have our routine, our crazy moments, our adventures. He teaches me as much as I teach him." Fiona smiled, remembering the desperate man she had found on the side of the road. The transformation was extraordinary. "And how's work, Aunt Fiona? Daddy told me you help other children like you helped me." "Exactly that, Theo. Remember when you were always sleepy and couldn't play properly? Now I work to ensure other children don't go through that." "That's so cool, you're like a superhero," Mark laughed. He's not wrong. "Fiona, we both know our lives would be completely different if you hadn't decided to help us that day. You saved yourselves. I just gave a little push. Aunt Fiona, can you come have dinner with us tonight? Daddy makes the best pasta in the world, and I can show you my school project about professions that help people." Fiona looked at Mark, who nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to, but only if you promise to teach me how to make pancakes too." "I promise. It'll be fun." As they walked down the street together, Theo skipping between the two adults, telling stories about school, friends, and his latest discoveries about how police cars work, Fiona reflected on how life can change with a single decision. 3 years earlier, she had broken all the protocols she had religiously followed for 15 years, simply because something told her a child needed help. That decision not only saved Theo and reunited his family, but also revealed to her a purpose she didn't even know she was looking for. Mark had become the father he always had the potential to be, but needed the opportunity and confidence to discover. Theo had transformed into a vibrant and healthy child, free to be exactly who he was without medications that altered his natural personality. And Fiona had discovered that her true calling was not to patrol highways and issue tickets, but to protect the most vulnerable and give a voice to those who couldn't defend themselves. "Aunt Fiona," Theo said as they reached the apartment building where Mark now lived, "thank you for helping us that day. Daddy told me the whole story when I was old enough to understand." "Thank you for helping me discover who I truly am, Theo." He smiled with the innocence of a child who grew up safe and loved. "We're kind of a strange family, aren't we? Not related by blood, but still taking care of each other." Mark laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "The best family I could imagine, champ." As they climbed the stairs to the apartment, Fiona thought about all the children she had helped in the past 3 years, All the families she had reunited, all the cases where her experience and intuition made a difference. Each of them was, in some way, an extension of that afternoon when she decided to stop, look closely and act. That night, during dinner with homemade pasta and pancakes for dessert, they laughed together, told stories, and unknowingly celebrated the silent miracle of ordinary people who chose to care for one another when they needed it most. Years later, Theo would become a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, inspired by his own experience and the example of courage he saw in the adults who saved him. Mark would continue to be a present and loving father, but would also become a volunteer lawyer for parents fighting for their children in situations similar to his own. And Fiona. Fiona would continue saving children, one courageous decision at a time, always remembering that sometimes the difference between a shattered life and a fulfilling life lies in an adult willing to stop, observe and act when they see a child needing protection. During the first few months after gaining definitive custody, Mark faced challenges he had never imagined. Theo, free from the medications that masked his true personality, proved to be an extraordinarily intelligent and energetic child. There were mornings when Mark woke to the sound of Theo taking apart a toy to understand how it worked, or found drawings scattered throughout the living room, the result of creativity that could finally express itself freely. "Daddy, why does the car go when you step on the pedal?" Theo asked one Sunday morning, as they had breakfast in the small apartment Mark had rented near his son's school. Mark smiled, remembering how these constant questions had become music to his ears. During the months Theo had been under Agnes's care, the child's natural curiosity was dormant, replaced by an artificial apathy that he now understood to have been the result of excessive medication. "How about we find out together? We can open the car hood and I'll show you the main parts." Theo's eyes shone with genuine enthusiasm. It was an expression Mark had forgotten existed, but which he now saw daily. Every discovery, every moment of satisfied curiosity was a small victory against the lost months. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Dr. Clara, who had become not only Theo's doctor but a close family friend. "Mark, I have the results of Theo's latest battery of tests." "How are they?" Mark felt a familiar pang of anxiety. Even after months, he still feared discovering lasting effects from the inappropriate medications. "Perfect, completely normal. There are no residual signs of any substance in his system, and all developmental indicators are above average for his age." Mark closed his eyes, feeling profound relief. "Thank you, doctor, for everything." "Mark, can I ask you something? How are you coping with all of this? I know it hasn't been easy." It was true. Although Theo was flourishing, Mark still faced moments of deep insecurity. There were nights when he woke up checking if his son was okay, tormented by guilt for not having realized what was happening sooner. There were days when he questioned every decision he made as a father, fearing he would repeat the mistakes that allowed Agnes to take control of their lives. "Some days are hard," he admitted, "but Theo helps me more than he knows. Every time I see him just being a normal child, I remember why it's all worth it." After hanging up, Mark watched Theo drawing at the kitchen table. It was a drawing of their family, him, Mark, and Fiona, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. In the bottom corner, written in still childlike letters, "My real family." "Theo, do you consider Aunt Fiona part of our family?" The boy looked up from his drawing. "Of course, Daddy. She saved us, and she always comes to visit and cares about us. Families don't have to live in the same house, do they?" The child's simple wisdom touched Mark deeply. Theo was right. Fiona had become a constant presence in their lives, not out of obligation but out of genuine choice. She attended Theo's school performances, helped with homework when Mark had to work late, and had become the person they called first when they needed advice or support. That afternoon, as Mark showed Theo how the car engine worked, he received a call from Fiona. "Mark, I need to tell you something important. I just left a meeting at the department. They offered me a promotion to coordinate the state child protection program." "Fiona, that's incredible. Congratulations." "Thank you, but it means I'll be traveling more, overseeing cases in other cities. I'm worried about being away from you both." Mark looked at Theo, who was completely absorbed examining the engine parts. "Fiona, this opportunity exists because of the experience you gained helping us. It would be wrong for you to refuse it because of us. But you two have become important to me. Very important." There was something in Fiona's tone of voice that made Mark pause. Over the past few months he had noticed how she lit up when she was with them, how naturally she participated in the family, rituals they had created. There were moments when he wondered if the feelings he was developing for her were reciprocated, but he always hesitated to address the subject, fearing to complicate the dynamic that worked so well. "Fiona, would you like to have dinner with us tonight? Theo is dying to show you his school project." "I'd love to. Can I bring dessert?" "You can just bring yourself. That's enough." That night, during dinner, Theo excitedly told Fiona about his school presentation on heroic professions. "I talked about you, Aunt Fiona. I told the whole class how you save children who are in dangerous situations." "And what did your classmates think?" "They were impressed. The teacher asked if you could come speak at the school about your work." Fiona looked at Mark. "It would be an honor." After Theo went to sleep, Mark and Fiona sat in the small living room. There was a comfortable intimacy between them, built over months of shared experiences and common goals. "Mark, can I ask you a personal question?" Fiona said. "Of course. How do you feel about the three of us, this situation we've created?" Mark chose his words carefully. "I feel like I finally have a complete family again. Not in the same way it was with Anna, but something new and special." "I feel that way too. But I worry if we're being fair to Theo, allowing him to get so attached to me when there are no clear definitions about our future." "Fiona, Theo got attached to you because you genuinely care about him. Regardless of what happens between us in the future, you will always be an important figure in his life. And what if I wanted there to be something more specific in our future?" The question hung in the air. Mark felt his heart race. "I would like that too," he admitted, "but I don't want you to feel pressure or obligation. Our situation is complex." "Mark, my feelings for you two have nothing to do with obligation. You gave me a purpose I didn't even know I was looking for. Theo taught me that I can be maternal without having biological children, and you showed me that it's possible to build something beautiful from difficult circumstances. So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop treating our relationship as an accidental consequence of a crisis situation and start treating it as a conscious choice to build a family together." Mark stood up and sat beside her on the sofa. "Fiona, I love you. I love how you care for Theo. I love your courage. I love how you transformed our lives. But I need you to be sure that this is what you want, not what you feel you should want." Mark, 3 years ago, I was a lonely police officer whose greatest achievement was efficiently issuing tickets. Today, I save children for a living. I have a 10-year-old boy who calls me aunt and loves me unconditionally. And I'm in love with a man who inspires me every day with his dedication and courage. I am absolutely certain that this is the life I choose. They kissed for the first time that night, 3 years after meeting on a dusty highway, with the urgency of saving a child. It was a kiss that sealed not only a romance, but the officialization of a family that had already existed in practice for a long time. The next morning, Theo found them having coffee together, and his reaction was pure joy. "Are you getting married?" he asked directly. Mark and Fiona exchanged glances, laughing. "Maybe someday, champ. For now, how about we get used to the idea of officially being a family?" "Can I call Aunt Fiona, Mom Fiona?" Fiona felt her eyes fill with tears. "If you want to, Theo, it would be an honor." In the months that followed, they navigated the typical challenges of forming a blended family, but with the solid foundation of genuine love and mutual respect. Fiona accepted the promotion, but organized her schedule to be present for Theo's important moments. Mark continued to grow in confidence as a father, now with the consistent support of a partner who shared his values and goals. Theo flourished academically and socially, becoming known at school as a bright and curious child. Occasionally, he still asked questions about the period when he lived with Agnes, but without apparent trauma. just natural curiosity about his own history. "Daddy, why did Grandma Agnes give me medicine that made me sleep?" "Because she didn't understand that you were perfect exactly as you were. Sometimes adults make mistakes when they try to fix things that aren't broken, and now she understands?" "I don't know, son, but the important thing is that now you are safe and can be exactly who you are." The answer satisfied Theo, who turned his attention back to the book he was reading about distant planets. 2 years later, in a simple ceremony in the garden of the apartment the three now shared, Mark and Fiona got married. Theo was the best man, carrying the rings with the seriousness of someone entrusted with an important responsibility. Dr. Clara was the witness, and Victor, Fiona's former patrol partner, officiated the ceremony as a justice of the peace. It was a small but perfect celebration, representing exactly who they had become, a family built not by chance or tradition, but by conscious choices of love, protection, and mutual growth. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Fiona, Mark, and Theo has touched your hearts as much as it has touched ours. This narrative reminds us that small acts of courage can transform entire lives, and that sometimes following our instincts to protect the most vulnerable is more important than following protocols. To continue following emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. Leave a like if you believe every child deserves courageous adults like Fiona in their lives, and tell us in the comments if you know anyone who, like Mark, fought to protect those they love. Every day we bring stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content.